Welcome to the Well Off Podcast, where the goal is to motivate, inspire, and share success principles. I'm your host, George Almasri. Kayla Andrade is a devoted landlord advocate. She guides landlords through complex policies and issues, and her dedication and advocacy skills have earned her recognition. She's also the founder of Ontario Landlords Watch, a grassroots organization that addresses rental housing market challenges and legislation to benefit landlords. On this episode, we discuss the benefits of using Front Lobby and the Landlord Credit Bureau, the changes that might be coming with Bill 97, how to create political change as a landlord, and other issues that landlords have been plagued with the last few years, and how you can really mitigate some of those risks. So I think you're going to enjoy this if you are a landlord or if you're considering getting into real estate as an investor. If you do appreciate the content, make sure to leave us a 5-star review and share this with a friend or family member that you think will learn something from Kayla's content. Now, the other thing I want to share with you is that we have some pretty cool opportunities for some properties in Hamilton, a 2-unit property and a 4-unit conversion. These are 2 separate properties that we are looking to sell. So if you'd like to discuss them, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram, WellOffX, or just go to welloff.ca and book a call with me there. Enjoy the episode. This episode was brought to you by Mortgage Dawn with Go Pineapple. I'm here with Kayla. Thank you for coming by. I appreciate having you in person.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
I know you're always passionate about this stuff, so we're going to get right into it. But I think I've had you on before, but I think you were with Sarah Larby at that time when we did a kind of a joint interview. Tell me a bit about your childhood. You were just kind of sharing about where you grew up, so tell me about that and the weather and all that stuff and some of your memories from that time.
Well, I grew up in Newfoundland, St. John's, Newfoundland, and we moved up in Ontario when I was 11. So this has been my home ever since. But Newfoundland was crazy. You get the rainy weather down there and the fog is something that we're used to. Nothing gets over, 25 degrees, which is perfect temperatures for me.
Yeah.
And we lived in government housing in Newfoundland. So really analyzing the housing, even at such a young age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you ever consider investing out there, or I don't know if you do?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think, are you drawn to that idea, or do you still think you'd prefer investing here in Ontario?
Once upon a time, I would say I would like to keep my investments close to where I live. But through these turbulence that we're seeing now in Ontario, it's definitely have opened my eyes to look at where else I can invest, where it makes sense and the numbers make sense, and they're more investor friendly. And that's where if you're into development, working with different provinces like Newfoundland, the word on the street is that they do get it done a lot quicker.
Right. Cool. So you're a big landlord advocate. You're a landlord yourself. You've been kind of involved with this Ontario Landlords Watch society or organization for a while. I think, are you the founder of that actually?
That is our baby.
Yeah.
We started that in 2010.
2010. Wow, that's a long time. So let's dive into that, because being a landlord in Ontario, a lot of politics kind of interferes with your abilities to do certain things. So I guess this organization is kind of working on the political front to try to create some change. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. It's going to be 2 fronts. One, it's about bringing the landlord community, the private sector community, the property managers, the paralegals, the realtors into this environment to get help and education to navigate the craziness of the Residential and Tenancy Act and the Landlord and Tenant Board. And then we take that information, we put reports together, and then we decide to challenge that with our elected officials at all levels. They have a lot of different policies and procedures and legislation from all levels of government that is impacting the private sector. So we like to take the voices of the Ontario Landlords Watch members, put that report, and then champion and advocate for those typical changes.
Okay, so can you give me an idea of how that would work? Let's say, what kind of data are you gathering?
So right now it's more of the understanding what the landlords are dealing with. So if we know what the pain point is for our landlords is non-payment of rent. So we understand that you have to go to the landlord and tenant board in order to get an eviction to evict that tenant for non-payment of rent. And that could take 7, 8, even 12 months, even longer, to evict that tenant. And we know the landlord and tenant board is already running at its full capacity of handling these type of applications. So what we look at now is, how can we make that better? How can we get access to justice to the good landlords and the good tenants, and streamline that approach? So we would advocate now that we want to privatize the landlord and tenant board.
Okay.
We need to hold somebody accountable. We need to streamline the non-payment of rent application and not have a full hearing. It doesn't need to have a 4-hour hearing to figure out why you refuse to pay rent, when we do have government services out there like local service managers that have rent relief banks in order to help these tenants pay their rent to keep them in their home, because our elected officials know it's very costly to have people living on the streets. It's cheaper to keep them in their homes.
So you're saying you would want the landlord and tenant board to be under the private sector so that the government no longer kind of controls it. Are there any other municipalities or states or anything that you're aware of that have this sort of system?
No, their systems are usually operating pretty smooth for that matter. So I don't think they've had that point where they were pushed to do that. Except BC, they are in just as hot water as the Ontario sector is with gaining access to justice. So it's just because the other ones are not doing it, we could be the first and set an example to go right across the country.
What do you think the odds are of the government relinquishing control of the landlord and tenant board?
The landlord and tenant board right now has collapsed. They're desperate. I can see them potentially looking at that as an option, especially since they were looking at privatizing the bailiffs. And it was spoken of in the House, but unfortunately, I think someone sneezed and forgot what their plan was to privatize the bailiffs. So, that's another aspect of what landlords are dealing with, not only the board, but their wait time for orders and then their wait time for the sheriff. So we have to start thinking outside of the box. And obviously, if you look at, their goal to build 1.5 million homes by 2031, I don't think they're calculating the units that are actually disappearing off of the unit because of the landlord and tenant board and the Residential and Tenancy Act.
Yeah. So this is like a pretty intense sort of idea that would be a major change. Do you have another proposition in case this doesn't go through? Like, have you thought of other ways that we can speed things up, speed up eviction, speed up that sort of thing?
Well, if you have even a privatizing of the landlord and tenant board, or having a two-tiered system, one is overfull and you have an expedited hearing that is needing to be addressed faster, then we can kind of work on the privatization. If not, plan C is us working with, why are we having a full hearing? A lot of these applications could be submitted to the landlord and tenant board, proof between the portal to show that the tenant didn't pay any type of rent and refused to make any type of rent. Then I think that's where it's coming in with Bill 97. With Bill 97, they are trying to make payment plans mandatory, in which if a tenant decides to make the payment plan with the landlord and then they fail that payment plan, the landlord can apply to the landlord and tenant board for a default order. But if an eviction order happens, the tenant still has that ability to apply for a stay. It's the same thing now, but at least the landlords are not waiting 12 months to get to the board, to wait another 3 months for a payment plan, to wait another month or 2 months for the default order, and then have to wait for the sheriff. So it almost just makes it mandatory for the tenants to work out that payment plan and avoid having to go to the landlord and tenant board to even have a hearing for the simple of non-payment of rent applications. Just stats alone for last year with the landlord and tenant board, there was over 31,000 applications at the landlord and tenant board. That tells us that is holding the landlord and tenant board down and not able to provide the hearing blocks to deal with more complicated matters where an adjudicator would be needed to help to deal with the dispute between the parties.
Sure. So with Bill 97, does that mean that if a tenant stops paying rent, then the documents would be uploaded to a portal, and then on the other side, an adjudicator or somebody would review these documents and make a decision? Is that kind of what you're saying?
We're still waiting to see how Bill 97 rolls out with that mandatory payment plan, because it's hard to make tenants do anything. And a lot of the tenant unions are trying to encourage tenants not to fill out a payment plan because it actually can be filed at the board and they could file for a default order. So we're still waiting to see how that transpires, but it is going to be put the portal in that you're filing in at the landlord and tenant board. Tenants can log in to actually see what was actually filed to make sure that the amount is correct. They will have an option, I would assume, in the portal to make that payment arrangement. It's now just on what's going to be considered fair, because if you're $18,000 or $30,000 in the arrears and your payment plan is $400 a month plus your additional rent, that's going to be a long time before you pay off those arrears. So that's where I think it's been a delay with how these mandatory payment plans are going to work out.
Sure. Now, just I know you're not a paralegal or whatnot, but you're knowledgeable of this. Just a general question: when a tenant offers a payment plan, let's say they're behind on rent, and they say, "Well, I'd like to pay you X amount extra per month," is there like a certain document that a landlord would have to fill out in that situation, or is it just the email would be sufficient?
You technically want to use the payment plan application part on the landlord and tenant board website. You can also utilize that paperwork as a binding contract between you and the tenant to let them know that this is your commitment to the payment plan. I'm willing to work with you. And you can also report that payment plan to frontlobby.com, and that payment plan or the unpaid rent or unpaid utilities can actually get reported to Equifax and Landlord Credit Bureau monthly. A problem that all of us landlords are dealing with when it comes down to professional tenants is that you're not finding out quick enough. We don't have the orders from the landlord and tenant board uploaded onto Canly as quick as they should be. So that's where landlords have to get into the habit of doing rent reporting monthly to reward their good tenants for build their credit, or to impact the tenants who feel that they want to skip out on their obligations.
Right. So this payment plan application, which is an official form, I guess, that you would find on the Landlord Tenant Bureau website or whatever. Yep. So that would, if you send that to Front Lobby, then that would show up on the tenant's credit report, that there would be like an outstanding amount. And
you don't need that form to send it to Front Lobby. You can just have like, this is your agreement. So it's about reporting the debt. So when you report the debt, let's say you're $1,800 for your monthly rent and you made a payment, you can report that payment on the platform with Front Lobby.
Okay. And Front Lobby, so tell me a bit, because Front Lobby, I think I've worked with a property manager in the past that uses it, but it's kind of like it gives you an outline of the tenant's profile and like their kind of their credit report and that sort of thing. But can you use it as a landlord yourself?
Of course. It's about geared, it was created for that small landlord in mind, so that you're able to pull your Equifax long form Equifax reports through Front Lobby. Once you're doing your credit check, everything's going great, but then, the tenant stops paying rent, you can report that unpaid rent or the utilities to Front Lobby without a judgment and without consent. So the only time you will need consent from the tenant is if you're reporting a good payment history. And that's when they want you to report the payment history to have their credit built to improve it. So if they do want to become homeowners, this is the great way to do it. And they also send out like rent reminder emails. Hey, rent's coming due soon, or hey, you're now late. This is how it can impact you. So it almost keeps our tenants organized, making sure that they're making their payments on time.
Mm-hmm. So Front Lobby would be like you would kind of set up a profile with the tenant's information, I would assume, right?
Yeah, you create your own little lease. You put how much the rent is, what unit it is, their name, their birth date. All you need is their full legal name and their birth date in order to report the debt.
Okay, and then you're saying they don't have to approve anything, they don't have to consent to anything. You can just set this up, put in all the information, and you're good to go?
You're good to go.
Cool.
And you only go in to report the debt every month.
Mm-hmm.
Besides that, if you're reporting a good payment history, it automatically gets reported. You just log in every 60 days to let the platform know, yes, what I'm reporting is correct. Mm-hmm. But you just put it in as the monthly debt, and it gets shipped off to Equifax in the middle of the month for the previous month.
Cool. Sorry. So if you're using another software to collect rent, can you use it in conjunction with Front Lobby? Are you aware?
There is something in the works. I wouldn't have any information on that right now, but it is starting to get integrated into a lot of property management systems.
Okay. Because I use Dwello generally to collect rent. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's like a pre-authorized debit system. So on the first of the month, it'll automatically pull money from the tenant's account. And then I get it a few days later. It gets kind of deposited into my bank account.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I think it is.
Something like like usually you can do it with your bank, but if you don't have very many, then it comes like it's a little bit of costly. So definitely would like to look into that.
So
as well.
Dwello, the nice thing about it is that you can connect multiple bank accounts, and they only charge you $3.50 per transaction. So I've looked at other like Pluto and some of these other ones, but I think like if you have more bank accounts, they start charging you more for this, right? So it's like I find it really
we
reasonably
pay like
priced.
$150 now just for an email money transfer. So it's definitely worth looking into.
Exactly. And I think they are connected to the tenants. Like it does report to their Equifax or their credit report, I should say, I believe as well. So anyway, it would be kind of cool to be able to work with both so that I can register that non-payment and the payment plan and whatnot. But
yeah, that's where it's like sometimes it gets reported based on being paid through the platform. This is like Front Lobby is more on the trust level of you're a verified member of Front Lobby. You've been verified and now you can report. And of course, tenants log in, see the information. If they ever seen something that they wanted to dispute, they can open up a dispute with Front Lobby and then handle it from there.
Got it. Now, what about the Landlord Credit Bureau? So I remember, like, I have looked into it. I haven't actually used it, but can you tell us a little bit about that? Is that something you founded or?
No, I wish I did. I wish I did. That's how I initially got, like I was with Bill 184. There's so many bills. It's like, come on, you guys got to give it up. With Bill 184, I was so distraught. It's based on the public consultation that had happened. It was like we were expecting massive changes, and it was like, nah, it was not the changes that we were looking for. So I started going on the web and finding Landlord Credit Bureau, and that's how it started. Was having you were able to directly report the tenancy record directly to Landlord Credit Bureau, but the people behind Landlord Credit Bureau also wanted to just stay that Landlord Credit Bureau, and then there was other services that have branched off of that. So when it comes down to like selling credit checks or selling the rent reporting of being able to be a member there, you got to have certain stipulations. So it's almost like you're building that tenancy record through Front Lobby, and that's Landlord Credit Bureau is the ones who are holding all that tenancy records.
So they work together. So if you're reporting something, it's through Front Lobby. It's not through the Landlord Credit Bureau.
Yeah.
So as a landlord, how do you benefit from the Landlord Credit Bureau?
Well, that's when you're doing your credit checks, you're also getting your credit checks from Landlord Credit Bureau too, so that when people are reporting, it's not just going to like the two, just like we have TransUnion and Equifax, Landlord Credit Bureau now is the one that has built that tenancy record. So you're going to be able to pull that from multiple avenues of getting the credit checks done.
Right. So with the Landlord Credit Bureau, are you just getting like a general credit report like from Equifax, or are you getting something?
It's like their payment history. Like you'll see what's been being reported for there. They used to have a review process, which obviously you have to be very cautious because I know a lot of our landlords are very passionate, and especially they just got burned by a professional tenant. So it comes down to you have to keep it very strict to the point of what that tenant did, if they paid rent on time. Some people are like, oh, they did this and they said this, and it's like, okay, maybe we take the review process out of that, and that's where it's now just holding the tenancy records of how they're making their payments. Because even though someone has bad credit, if you see that they make their payment for rent on time, that's something to be looking at, right? So we know that things happen for tenants, and we're not, completely against tenants. We're just looking out for our good tenants out there. So we do want to have all these different type of tools to help them excel and making sure that they can find a suitable accommodation, especially through this craziness of a housing shortage. It's absolutely brutal.
It is, yeah. Do you use Rentify at all?
No.
Have you heard of it? Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
Yeah. But are you not a fan of it, or?
No, it's just like it's more the open banking. And I just don't know about the laws quite yet regarding open banking. And some of our good tenants are not into opening up their bank accounts like that so much to people. And as a landlord, you have to be professional about it and not be so invasive to asking for certain things. Like sometimes the tenants want to provide you with their bank statements regardless, but just demanding it and scanning it, and it becomes just more of a, you could be turning away some really good tenants just because you're being too confrontational with what you're asking from and requirements wise. Sometimes you have to go with your customer service, your gut feeling, and getting a good feel with judging and reading a credit check. Some people don't even know they just see the score and they're like, okay, you got the place. It's like, whoa, hold up. Like, don't just look at the score. You got to look at that available credit that's available to these people and then map it out. Like if they got into trouble, they would be able to utilize this type of data, or it's their car payments or their student loans. There's a lot of things that you have to put into consideration when you're reviewing someone's credit report.
Yeah, absolutely. So just the reason I bring up Rentify, so obviously you can't demand it and you can't make it mandatory, but I always ask, and often people will say yes. And I've turned down a couple of tenants because of things that I found on there that I would have otherwise not known about. For example, there was one where the person had like payday loans. They would go regularly and just borrow money before they receive their paycheck. And I can see that they were like really tight on cash, but I wouldn't have known that just by looking at a credit report. So like that's an example of how Rentify has really helped.
Choosing the right mortgage product isn't always about the lowest interest rate. My name is Don Chen, mortgage agent with Pineapple Financial, and here are the two things you need to keep in mind. First, exit cost. Does your mortgage product incur a high penalty cost when you need to refinance or make any adjustments to your mortgage, or if you need to sell your property? Secondly, equity accessibility. If you need to access equity that has been built up, does your mortgage product allow you to do that freely and also in the most cost-effective manner? These two things will put the most amount of dollars in your pocket and help you get ready for your next real estate project. I would love to connect with you for all your mortgage-related questions. You can reach me at 647-961-3281, or you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at The Mortgage Dawn.
See, that's where it would look good, and I think it's gone to the point where maybe Rentify is going to be that new part of it. But I didn't like it. Was like more of like just trust that, not the credit checks. I think it was the branding to it. It's like no, we still need credit checks. You can offer this as another tool, and that could be that next level of these tenant screening tips that these landlords are sharing with each other, because we can't afford to mess up on your tenant screening now. Tenant screening has become the thing. Like if you're in a landlord group trying to grow your portfolio, don't even go there yet. You got to go into making sure that you are fully educated on what to do for your tenant screening and understanding how to deal with difficult tenants before you even bother going to do that. Because it's great to look at that property and see the cash flow and say, oh yeah, the numbers work. If you don't manage it properly or choose the right type of tenant properly, those numbers are out the window.
Well, yeah, like I'd say if you're evicting a tenant for non-payment and they don't pay at all for those months that you're waiting, you're looking at least a $10,000 deficit from that, right?
And
between like at least.
Have you been taking part in the landlord and tenant board hearings online yet lately? Oh my God, they're like 36, 38.
Yeah, but I'm talking about like if you're renting a unit, if it's rented for like $1,000 a month or something like that, right? Like that's the minimum amount you can expect, plus your paralegal fees and all that. So,
and the filing fee and the sheriff fee.
Yeah.
And the damages that are left over.
Yeah. Which is often like they often leave stuff behind, right? When they move out, there's often furniture and stuff that you have to get rid of. But just to go back to what we were discussing earlier about making changes and in terms of challenging the politicians and the people that are controlling these things, what does that process look like? Like, I know you said you have data that you gather, and then how do you present that? Like, what do you do to allow Ontario to become more landlord friendly?
Well, one, it's about encouraging our landlords to email their MPP. That's the provincial one, right? People are getting confused with what level of government, and obviously a lot of our problems are at the provincial level. So it's about incorporating them into these emails. Then it's about setting that meeting with your MPP. And it's great to go there and have with your issue and say, hey, I want you to fix it. But we can't be doing that anymore. It's more about reaching out to the organization, us, like Ontario Landlords Watch. We're going to give you the recommendations that we are suggesting to our elected official to make it fair and balanced. And then that way we can work ourselves into the next chapter of Ontario Landlords Watch. After the conference, we're going to be talking about bringing a committee together. We're always invited to these consultations. They have like roundtable discussions. We'll sit around them, but you can tell that you're almost at that lone wolf at the table, trying to highlight the grassroots problems of what they're dealing. So we want to have that committee that have already been involved in Ontario Landlords Watch so long. We're just going to formalize it now, and so we are going to be working as a team to make sure that we have and invite them to the table and have those type of discussions on how we get it changed and why. But we have to push back. Like right now, you have tenants are part of a tenant union. There is a wave of them trying to get tenants to take part in a rent strike movement, which is going to put one building is putting 300 applications to the landlord and tenant board. That is obviously not good for our landlord and tenant board that is already buckling at its seams. So if we have that type of power, and the reason why our elected officials seem to be listening to them is because Acorn, they're showing 140,000 units or 140,000 people within their membership. So what do the elected officials do? We need to build our numbers. We need to have more warriors in this war. We got to show them that we are that good chunk of our affordable housing or housing in general. About 70% or more of us are the private sector is the ones building the supply. And they're seeing it now when the supply is dwindling. The supply is not increasing. They know the private investors are looking elsewhere. And we want to educate those landlords to say, hey, these are the countries that these landlords are looking at to get out of Ontario. There's people on TikTok talking about Ontario is not investor friendly. Don't even shop here. We're going to impact them that way in order for them to stop, pause, and think, okay, let's stop listening to the developers. Let's stop listening just to the realtors. We need to bring that mom and pop landlord, property managers, paralegals into this conversation to find out what we can do to make this system fair for both parties, because obviously it's not fair for the landlords right now, and that's why we're going to see the impact that we're having in our housing crisis.
Mm-hmm. And when you've been at some of these roundtable discussions that you mentioned, what are you hearing from the other side? Why is it that things are the way they are? Why aren't these changes coming sooner?
It's political suicide for them to do what is needed to get done, because it looks like they're benefiting the developers. They're benefiting those greedy little landlords. And that's why we're trying to switch it a little bit to call ourselves the private housing sector, or private housing providers, in order to make it a difference between here's government housing and here is us. And you'll have the other opposition of saying, hey, housing is a human right. Is it housing a human right, or is shelter a human right? And whose responsibility is it to actually be the person to provide affordable housing or to provide shelter? It's your government. And they've failed to do that. And they've passed their responsibilities on to the private sector. And now they're choking out the private sector with bylaws and regulations and legislations that are impacting our abilities to keep growing our portfolio, in which we keep what we have. But in order to keep what we have, we need to incorporate increases and hopefully for turnaround in order to be able to keep up with the demand of the expenses of that property. Mm-hmm. And if not, or with 2.5% rent increases, when the landlords are having a tenant move out, we have to jack it to a certain point to cover what we would predict for property taxes, for our insurance, for our utilities. And that's why they're seeing such a huge gap. I think if we got rid of 2.5% cap, I don't think we would be seeing the type of rents that we have today. But you look at Alberta and they're doing great still.
Well, the thing is, this is just my thought, but the rent control is creating a huge divide between the current units, the rent of the current units, and market rent. Mm-hmm. So if you didn't have that rent control, you would see more of a median. So the the current units would increase slightly, but then the market rent would come down, and you would have a more balanced market. Right now, there like you have people that are paying $700 a month, but that unit would rent for $2,000 a month if it were today's market rent, for example. There's a huge discrepancy between that. So, but I don't know if the cap on that will change anytime in the near future. It doesn't seem like it.
What they've created now is where you're creating bad landlords out of good landlords. Because of everything have increased for the landlords, the interest rates, the property taxes in KWC area are going to go up 10%. You look at, okay, as a business, what are you going to do? How do you get more money? And you can't with only 2.5%. Can you offer a different service to the tenant to negotiate a higher rent? And if they pay that on time, every single month on time, it becomes the lawful rent? Or are you going to look for the stuff that you normally would let slide from a tenant? Are you going to now start issuing applications to evict them because of it?
Or look for other ways.
Or move into the place, or to do mass renovations with the N13, which obviously Bill 97 is trying to prevent owners from being able to apply for an N13 until they have someone coming in to verify that, yes, the tenant does need to vacate, but they do have to offer the unit back to the tenants at the same rate anyways.
Well, I think they're starting to become a little bit more strict on the N13 applications. Like we're doing it because we're actually converting a single family to a duplex.
So you're providing housing.
Yeah, exactly. But from my understanding, based on the conversation with the paralegal at this point, we need to provide an affidavit from a contractor that the tenant can't stay in the unit during the renovations. We need to have a building permit. We need to have drawings. We need to have like a designer on board providing all the documentation. So all of these things that weren't necessarily required, let's say last year or 2 years ago with an N13 application.
And here they are crying to the private sector to create more units. They are said that they're trying to cut the red tape, get the gatekeepers out of the way, but they just put in a gatekeeper, and that's going to prolong your time frame of getting that unit empty, getting the renovations done, getting 2 brand new sparkling units for 2 families, and maybe hopefully bring back that one that you wanted. But there should be a balance in where if I have to evict you for renovations because I want, like, we need that. Sometimes you want to do a refinance on your property. Our place needs to look good, but you should be coming back at a little bit of a higher rate to say, this is how much money I put in my property. You're going to be the one benefiting from it. This is where we can see being a practical increase for you to come back to the place. But, we need supply. We need that supply. And this is why it's hard for these people to move, because they know the rent is higher elsewhere. Yeah. And that's the trouble that people are seeing. We have over 855,000 people in Ontario on social assistance.
Wow.
We do not have near that amount for government housing. And these are the people who have felt the pain of all these rules and regulations coming in from our government. And we're trying to help them. I've come from a family of tenants. Every single one of my family is tenants. My husband's side is landlords. So I am really trying to figure out what is the best way to, stop these tent encampments, stop our taxpayers from paying $3,000 a month to house one person in emergency shelter, or pay money to have sleeping pods, shipping containers with no washroom facilities next to a city dump in Waterloo. That is their form of housing. That is going backwards in what our goals should be as our elected officials who we hire. We pay them to do what we think is better for all of society, and they're literally doing the opposite. So people really need to pay attention to who they're voting for any elected official. Don't just look at the leader.
The landlords are outnumbered. So it's a little bit tough in that with that respect. But what I was going to say is that back to that example about the duplex conversion. So we applied for a minor variance, multiple minor variances actually, because there are multiple properties. But the adjudicators at the minor variance were very supportive of our application, because they kept reiterating that their policy is to add more housing. So what's the difference between, like, where's the disconnect between these municipalities, I guess, like in this case it was the city of Welland, and the, I guess, provincial sort of group that's in charge of the landlord-tenant board? Is the landlord tenant board a provincial thing? I guess it is, right? In this
Yeah,
case?
we've
Yeah.
got Doug Downey. Doug Downey is the attorney general, so he's overseeing all the tribunals, and there's supposed to be a faster way of getting justice than going to the courts. But you have the provincial government that had issued, to the municipalities, like, listen, you need to allow these properties to be built. So even with the landlord and tenant board, it's honestly, you're shooting in the dark. You don't know what type of adjudicator you're going to get. There's no consistency at the landlord and tenant board, and that's what our elected officials need to roll out in the landlord and tenant board, that there is some type of consistency. Even for the non-payment of rent going through the board, we have Section 83. So because of COVID, that's now been done. But
What's
there's
Section 83?
It's where they can delay or refuse an eviction based on the concept that someone was impacted by COVID. But that mandate has now been done with, but the adjudicators are still using it, where they're forcing people into a payment plan. And now that it's all been done, that's why Bill 97, I think, came into play to make sure that mandatory. But your adjudicators, you need to check them out online, get to see where they're from. They come from a social justice tribunal too. So you can see that a lot of their judgments are going to come from their previous work experience. We need someone that's like, we need black and white. Like, you don't pay rent, this is how it's going. Like, if you are ruining the enjoyment of others, this is how you're going. If you need to be using your standard lease to inform your tenants that in X amount of years, I do plan to move into this, or in X amount of years, I plan to renovate this, be upfront with the tenants versus trying to encourage the tenants to fight every single application that comes to them, because all applications don't need to be at the board.
Sure. Are you familiar with any other systems, landlord-tenant systems, let's say in the States, like Florida, for example, like that kind of thing, where they're able to get evictions much faster? How is it that they're able to do so? I'm sure they have large numbers of files that come their way. Have you ever studied any of those other systems?
I haven't studied it closely to talk about it confident about it, but I do know our landlords are in there, and they do seem that it's a streamlined process, but there's also benefits. They have like Section 8, so a lot of the money is also being put to them from a part of the government there. But I'm really highlighting what's happening in Canada, just so that when we are making any type of recommendations that we're finding, it's that we can say that it's in Canada, it's happening here, let's incorporate that in here. And we were advocating for our landlord and tenant board hearings to be online even before COVID, and they said that they were planning to do it before COVID. It's just COVID had sped it up.
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, you're listening to that, now let's start working ourselves with writing, just, hey, did you pay your bill? Do you have any proof that you paid it? No? Okay, here's a judgment. But they know it's just going to speed up that eviction process. They know it's going to, that the municipalities are going to feel it. And they're using the small landlords as a social agency with no compensation. So we have to even speak up to who we want to see at the landlord and tenant board, which adjudicators they are.
Sure. Now, on a brighter note, let's...
I know. Continue to invest in real estate. It's still amazing.
And Ontario is still a great place to invest. And the reason that it's great is because the rents are so high and the demand is so high for rent. So especially on the commercial side, most of the people listening know that the value of a building is determined by the net operating income, which is impacted by the rent. So you do have that ability. Let's say you're buying a building with under market rent by a substantial amount. If you can find a way to turn over some of those units, you can make some good money. And that works on the duplexes and the single family homes as well. So it's just something to keep in mind, that these challenges are also opportunities for landlords, because if you're creative and you find a way to make this happen, you can really benefit from it.
Oh, 100%. I had an $1,800 unit plus utilities. We had 118 inquiries in 24 hours. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh my God. The next day it was 119 inquiries. Yep. I would say we're blaming it on the mass immigration that we have coming here. It's crazy to see how many students are applying to these type of rental units. And this is where we see a lot of people pivoting from their long-term investments into short-term, because the need is there for them as well. Yeah.
And the other really important thing is that even if you do get market rent today, well, this is just my opinion. Don't forget to increase the rent every year, because you
Yes.
got to make sure you're catching up. And yeah, that'll help you mitigate that and not be $600-700 under market rent after a few years, right?
Oh yeah, even offering our tenants like, hey, a central air system, an extra $50 a month onto your rent for an essential air. Ask them on a hot day and they'll say for sure, right?
Yeah.
So this is great ways to, try to pivot. And we look at what our rental units are, and people are keeping their parking separate from their leases in order to be able to have more control in the situation, and also gain more funds for charging extra for a parking spot that you have there. Obviously, people are doing like a 50-60 split, on their utilities just to try to work it. And air conditioners are now allowed into everyone's rental unit, even if the landlord doesn't approve of it. But you do get to increase the rent for that time period that the tenant does have an air conditioner in their unit. So definitely I know they're good tenants. You don't want to do it, but honestly, what we have in store for us, you need to keep up with your rents, your rent increases, because it's going to come to a point where many of these landlords are now who can't even raise their rent to the amount that it should be, because they just refuse to do it because the tenant was just a good tenant. And now they can't even carry the property.
Right. There's a lot to digest here. I appreciate you sharing your opinion on this. Do you want to tell people about the conference that you have coming?
Yeah, so every year we bring our landlord community together from online, bringing them into in person. They come from Windsor all the way from Ottawa right into the little Cambridge, Ontario, in the KWC area, Kitchener-Waterloo. And we are there to educate our landlords on what they need to do next regarding tenant screening. We're going to be talking about how they're writing their rental ads. Oh my God, how many rental ads have I seen that have been so horrible that you got human rights issues all over it. So we're going to teach our landlords that. We're giving out lease addendums to help the landlords when they are getting new tenants in there. We are talking about the new changes at the Landlord and Tenant Board, the Residential Intensive Act, what our goals are for now banking wise. So the banking insights, because a lot of our paralegals have been telling me there's a lot of landlords coming to them in hot water. So we want to give that education to them as well, to make sure that they have a deep understanding of what's happening, helping you understand the ways to deal with a difficult tenant. Our landlords do get very emotional, so we're bringing that type of education to the conference. At the dinner, 10 items on our buffet. We have a cake, we have cookies. We definitely make it a sweet wedding feel, because we want to be original, and that's what we are, so that we can obviously stick out to our landlord and property management community, but also to our elected officials. So we put some invitations out as well. We've had elected officials there in the past, so we'll see who we get to bring this year at the conference. But we have to be stronger together and support each other, and make sure that we're all beating to the same drum. So we're going to make sure that we're building more warriors to win this war.
Yeah, so I'll make sure to include information on that in the show notes, and that's going to be on October 28th, correct?
October 28th. It's going to be a cutoff on October 14th, just because we are doing a buffet. We want to make sure that we have enough food to go around for everyone. So yeah, it would be the cutoff. It would be the 14th for people to register.
Awesome. Do you have any final thoughts, any sort of final message you want to share?
Real estate is still good. I know I may come as the bearer of bad news or this dark cloud. It's more the concept to scare you to learn more, because there is ways around it. I've been doing this business for 20 years. I've had one bad tenant. So I want to teach everybody to know what I did to only have that one bad tenant, and that was a good tenant gone bad. That was like husband and wife, and I got stuck with the husband. So I still count myself to, knock on wood. But we do need to get that education level out to our landlords, and just know that there is support out there for them. And it's our free Ontario Landlords Watch group. It's a way for us to give back to the community and strengthen our advocacy voice. And if you want change, it starts from within.
How does someone get involved with the group?
You can find us on Facebook. So it's Ontario Landlords Watch members. You can look me up on Facebook. So Kayla Andrade, send me a message to let me know. We do have, a little bit of people coming in. We'd like to ask a few questions. So if you said that you heard me here on the Well Off podcast, then I can let you in a little bit quicker.
Awesome.
But I'm telling you, if you're not sounding like a landlord, you're out. Or a property manager or a realtor. You got to be on the same mission as we are.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right, Kayla, thank you for sharing all this. And I appreciate that you're trying to make positive changes for landlords. We need more people like you doing this. So thank you for everything.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Well Off Podcast. If you enjoy the show, then I'd really appreciate if you left us a review on iTunes and let us know your thoughts. In order for us to get a larger audience, it's really important to have reviews, so your support is extremely appreciated. And also, don't forget to share the podcast with your friends and family. Until next time, I'm George Almasri. Have a great day.